Let us start. My name is Etienne Bassot. I'm the director of the Members Research Service at the EPRS, and I would like to welcome you warmly to this event for the presentation of the EPRS Economic and Budgetary Outlook for the European Union 2023. I noticed this is the seventh time that we are issuing this publication here, and I would like starting by thanking the authors, Alessandro D'Alfonso, Martin Höffelmeier, Caroline Kowald, Sidonia Mazur, Marin Milosnich, and Mariana Pari. This is a collective work of 160 pages looking at economic policies, but also with this important tool that the EU has, which is the budgetary policy, and bringing the two together. And I think there are not many publications that take that particular angle. This is very interesting also at a time where the Union is under pressure of several crises. Of course, we were coming out of the COVID crisis about a year ago. Then we were hit by this war that has many consequences on various fronts that puts pressure also on economic policy. So there are a lot of issues on the table to discuss today. Of course, also our innovative instrument, Next Generation EU, will be discussed, fiscal policy and economic governance framework. So this is a lot on the table today. And without further ado, I think we can start the event and the discussion. I will hand over to Tim, who will introduce the other speakers. Tim is the head of our budgetary policies unit, and he will present the different speakers of the roundtable, and then we'll go for a discussion. This is an event that will take in total 1.5 hours. So I encourage you to already think about questions that you might have for the second part of the event. So many thanks for having joined us today, and over to you, Tim, to introduce the speakers.
Yes, thank you, Etienne, and welcome also from me to all participants, and particularly, of course, to the panelists. We today will discuss a bit on the basis of our study and inspired by the study. I have it here. I mean, you'll have it also seen, this jigsaw used to advertise the event. And there you see different jigsaw pieces. One is, of course, money. We're talking about a lot of money. We're talking about the EU budget of 186 billion euro this year, plus NGEU financed grants was 113 billion euro. So that's a lot of money. Of course, on top of that, we also hope that the EU money will attract additional private investment in order, and if you there look at the second piece of the jigsaw, to stop a downward economic trend and create an upward economic trend, meaning more growth. You can see the third and fourth jigsaws, green and digital transition, which are important pieces and objectives of the whole von der Leyen Commission, but of course, particularly also of the NGEU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. You see the flag of Ukraine, of course, the war which started around a year ago. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has changed Europe in many aspects. We have a war in Europe. We have the refugees. We have had the negative impact on our economy through inter alia high energy prices. We have provided a high amount of EU money out of the budget, but also of some other instrument to the Ukraine. And that will, of course, also be one of the main factors for the economy and the EU budget for the year 2023. And then you see inflation. It has been at a record high of over 9% average annual inflation in the EU last year, and it's expected to decrease, but still will remain well above the 2%, which are always a bit of the which are a target of the ECB. And so that will, of course, also have an impact on our economy in the year 2023, but of course also on our budget. All in all, a number of uncertainties lie ahead, which make any forecast a bit challenging. Of course, when will the war end? Will it end this year or not? What will be with the inflation? And we are also talking about a possible revision of the MFF. We as Parliament believe that when the MFF was set up and established, that certain parts, particularly again the war of course, and other developments haven't been taken into account, which merit also some changes. The European Commission has also promised a reform of the economic governance structure for this year. So these are all interesting topics for our debate. And I wanted to also inform you that you can ask your questions then through the chat function, and we will then forward your questions to the panel. We will start with a short presentation or a short introduction by the panelists, where they will focus on the topics that they think are of the most interest to them from our economic and budgetary outlook. We will start with Nicolae ŞTEFÂNUșțân. He's a member of the European Parliament representing the citizens of Romania, and he's also a vice president of the National Political Party Union to Save Romania. Nico has studied at the Georgetown University in Timișoara in Romania, but also at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna and European Studies at the University of Vienna. He has worked actually as a colleague in the European Parliament in different functions on agriculture and budget. And in 2019, he has been elected a member of Parliament and is part of the Renew group. He will focus naturally as rapporteur of the EU budget for 2023 on more the budgetary questions. Is the EU budget fit for purpose? Do we have the funds that we need in the EU budget and in the MFF to tackle the challenges that the EU has to tackle? That's the, I think, overarching question I have to you, Nico, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Etienne. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you. I feel at home, obviously, for obvious reasons. But I was invited here to speak to you about the budget, which was an amazing experience and a very difficult experience in a difficult year. When I was appointed budget rapporteur for 2023, at the end of the year, our biggest concern were to have enough money for vaccines. That's what I thought in the 2022 budget. That was my highest priority, and that was Parliament's highest priority. It turned out 2023 didn't come as planned. It wasn't the year of recovery, but it hit us really hard with three big surprises. And these surprises were the one on the 24th of February, Ukraine. Then came soaring energy prices, then came inflation. So to the two crises we already had on our hands, came three more in one single year. And to answer your question from the beginning, Tim, is the budget fit for purpose? No, it is far from it. Far from it. And we started the entire budgetary discussion with something very, very clear, that the recognition that the budget is not fit for purpose and that the real solution is in the revision of the MFF. The real solution is not in the draft amending letters or the draft amending budgets that were presented here and there, because guess what? The margins are almost non-existent. So we try to overstretch our budget. We try to do budget washing to present something as something that it is not. But the reality is that without a revision of the MFF, we are turning in circles. So in March, I called for a revision of the MFF. That was kind of strange, no, for colleagues that the budget rapporteur for 1 year speaks about the MFF. But it is the reality that I mentioned. And also, I think we won that argument because Ursula von der Leyen, in her Soteu speech, in the State of the Union speech, said that the budget needed to be reviewed and committed to doing it this year. So what have we done, however, with the limited resources we have? I think what we managed to achieve for the 2023 budget was a success nonetheless. We obtained 1 billion additionally for Parliament's resources, and we left in the reserves 1 billion for the whole remainder of the year. So at some point during the negotiation, I kind of noted this symbolic value of one for you, one for us. It is something I think Paul Rubik instituted in Parliament's negotiation, this rule of 1 billion for you, 1 billion for us. I think it was our dear director Andrea Strasser with her great institutional memory who told me about this. But in any case, I think we managed to obtain very important points for the Parliament's position, given the fact that 450 million were left in the reserves. Can you imagine? 450 million were left in the reserves, in the margins, at the beginning of the budgetary procedure. So this doesn't include the special instruments, the flexibility instrument, etc. It's only the reserves, and they were in the order of 456, if I'm not mistaken. This was 1/3 of the margins of last year. Can you imagine? And the priorities were 3 times bigger because we had 3 additional crises on top of everything else we had last year. So in any case, we obtained the 1 additional billion euros for the consequences of the war in Ukraine. So the Parliament had a strategy. We said, let's not do the usual Christmas tree where everybody gets a bit. Let's do 3 big boxes of objectives. And my colleagues initially criticized me. They said that I'm being perhaps too shy because our increases were in total of 1.7 billion, and usually the Parliament has increases of 2 or even 3 billion. But I said, in order to be a realistic negotiator in a tough year, I need to put numbers that are realistic on the table. And I didn't let go from this argument when the Council said, well, the Parliament's position is plus 1.7 and ours is minus 2.7, which means we should be closer to the Council's for some reason. I said, no, I'm not playing that game. So the first box was the war consequences of Ukraine invasion. And this doesn't only mean militarily, humanitarily. It also means, for instance, Erasmus for students that come from Ukraine. It means it's across the board and across the headings increases. Secondly, obviously, and I think everybody expected this to do, energy crisis. We literally took every single budget line that had energy, innovation in energy supplies, etc., and we focused money there. I want to say one more thing. And the third chapter, obviously, was economics and society in general, where we speak about also culture, also students, things like continuing the EPPO, for instance, the civil justice aspect, or the crisis prevention, such as UCPM. Now, I think it was smart to do it like that because it is kind of easy for the citizen to understand that we respond to their needs. We focus on what where it hurts. But we obtained, obviously, the increases that I mentioned for each of these chapters. But we are always reminded that the 1% GNI rule is so outdated. Aline, what was the report from the 70s we can... McDougall. The McDougall report, I'm sorry, I had a cheat sheet here, which is my wonderful, competent colleague, Aline Orgoan, who always cited in my speeches and so on, the McDougall report that from the 70s, late 70s, that said if the Union were to accomplish all its political goals, it would need about 5% GNI. Can you imagine? This was 1977. I don't know what that percentage would be in 2023, where the powers are much bigger, much more important, and we are still at the 1% GNI rule. So it is a problem. It is a problem because the citizens think we are sitting on a a train load of money. That's what they think. And if it's Turkey, as it is right now, or if it's the forest fires that will come for sure in Portugal and Spain, but somewhere else as well this summer, or if it's another pandemic, or if it's the economic crisis, the Union should respond. And the reality is the barrel is empty. That's the naked reality, and the 1% doesn't cut it anymore. This is also a political problem, and I kept saying it to my colleagues. This is a political problem because on the eve of new European elections, if the Union does like it did in February 2020, showing Italy its empty pockets, that there was nothing put in the common pool of resources for the civil protection when there were thousands of deaths in Bergamo. Now, that has political consequences that we see even today. And that is clear. Now, one last point that I want to make is the fact that I was talking about budget washing, and now we have all these intergovernmental loan-based resources. We have the sovereignty fund. The sovereignty fund is needed. The entire industrial sector needs it. Catching up with Germany and France is needed. Not everyone has hundreds and hundreds of billions to invest in economy and the AAA rating to go with it. So the sovereignty was needed. But the reality is that indebtedness starts to be a problem. We see there's more an appetite for grants and not so much for loans. And the solution to this, honestly, I think it is through a real revision of the MFF that looks also about own resources, but own resources is not enough. And I remind you that the way Parliament negotiated, was forced to negotiate, was that whatever comes from own resources is actually suppressed by a rebate that goes back to the member states from the GNI contribution. So actually the own resources doesn't make us richer. It just saves on the other through the back door. So these are some ideas for thought to kick off the debate. I'm sorry, I don't want to take so long of it. As a matter of experience, I just want to say one thing for those who come after me doing the same thing. Don't be put in a corner by the way the Commission or the Council negotiates. They are very aggressive. They want to make us look like we are asking for unreasonable things. They put us in a corner pointing to our 52 posts for cybersecurity or I don't know what, leaking articles to Politico, making us look like irresponsible fools. Well, my lesson from this is don't get bullied by those two institutions. Play the game. Always have the numbers on hand. Have a wonderful team to help you. Just because I was reminded of one thing, because we were asking for our political priorities, they kept pointing at this like personnel issue that the Parliament always wants to hire new posts, etc. Whereas the Council made savings of 7 billion last year, and these savings come from fines that the union didn't have to pay, but also from the fact that some of the own rebates will play in the own resources will play in the 22-23 budget. But sometimes they accuse us of murder when it's about peanuts, and they get away with billions in terms of savings. So that's why I think really the 1% is something that belongs to the past, that we should really be upfront and strong about it and say it's not just about us, it's about the future of the union. Thank you.
Dear Nico, thanks a lot for this highly interesting analysis, political analysis of the budget situation of the EU, but also on some insight on the negotiations that you have experienced with the other institutions. Thanks a lot for sticking out.
Tim, I understand the Commission is also in the room, so I don't want to start a fratricide war. I just, I say it as I see it.
Yeah, of course, that's what the events at EPRS are for, to speak openly, even though I think Géraldine MAHIEU, she's not working for DG Budget, so I don't know whether she can immediately reply to what you have said. Géraldine, also a warm welcome to you, and thanks a lot for participating in today's event of the EPRS. Géraldine is a director for investment, growth and structural reforms in the Commission's DG ECFIN. And Géraldine is a renowned economist, originally from Belgium. She holds a PhD in economics from the Catholic University of Louvain, and she has a long career in the European Commission as an economist. Also, she worked as a senior economist in the International Monetary Fund, and among others, she was head of unit in charge of providing EU member states with technical support in the areas of labor market, healthcare, education, and other social issues. She is exactly the right person to explain to us now how the NGEU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility work, and how they will support the European economy, and how they will put us back on a sustainable growth path in the EU. Géraldine, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for this invitation, for this warm welcome and a nice introduction of what I've done so far. And good afternoon to all of you. I mean, I glanced through your report, which is extremely comprehensive. So I tried, and it covers a lot of ground. So I'm going to give a bit of a glance of a few things, and starting from the economic situation as we see it, and then looking a bit at the RRF and how we see the impact on growth, and then looking a bit also at the economic governance review. But I will not just dwell too much on it, because I know that Martin Large is there, and he will certainly cover that extensively. So just to say that on the economic situation, so I think that we share basically the analysis, which is that last year the EU economy has shown remarkable resilience in a quite very challenging environment. And in the first 3 quarters of 2023, the growth was essentially driven by consumption, private consumption, supported by clear unemployment increases, and by also significant policy support amid the high inflation. The last quarter of 2022, then there was a clear reduction in growth due to the war that we've mentioned, the increase in energy price. Now we are in the middle of preparing our revised focus, but it seems to be that compared to our autumn focus, the last quarter will not be as bad as we expected, in the sense that we have like the flash estimate from the Eurostat, which shows that the growth will be flat, so no growth, compared to what we had initially expected for that last quarter of minus 0.5. So against this background, the economic outlook is a bit better than we had initially anticipated. We see also that a purchasing manager index is, as for the first time since June 2022, hedged to the positive territory, expansionary territory. We have also some economic sentiment indicators showing that it's not as bad as we expected, and just increase a bit, and it's just 1 notch above the long-term average. So growth is not, the impact of the war is not as bad as we expected, and so maybe with the carryover from 2023, we may have a bit of a slightly better outlook for 2023, but at the same time, this is clearly not a huge growth, because we have indeed some persistent headwinds in our face, including due to the tightening of the monetary and financial condition, wage growth that is picking up, and so still below inflation, so that reducing the income. And we have, as you have mentioned, a large uncertainty that still weighs on the EU economy. And we are preparing our focus, but in a nutshell, we are going to be maybe a tiny bit higher than we were for 2023, but not necessarily much. Now on the RRF, so as you know, so I've played quite a large part of my time in the last 2 years to put this instrument together, and then help the implementation of it together with all my colleagues. And so we are basically almost 2 years after the start of the implementation of this Recovery and Resilience Facility, which, as you know, will be our centerpiece for our response to the COVID crisis, with large amount of money, up to 724 billion in loans and in grant. And member states have really put forward very ambitious plans, what we call recovery and resilience plan, that include a lot of investment, also major reform, to try to just in line with the ambition to make our economy more resilient, more sustainable, and also better prepared for the green and digital transition, which is a key feature of this. And it addresses a high number of CSRs, which is one of the assessment criteria that we have for the RRPs. And in particular, we can note, for example, a major labor market reform in Spain has been included in plan, and now implemented a large justice reform of the justice system in Italy, or anti-corruption and rule of law in Croatia, higher education in Slovakia. So it's just to give a few examples, but generally we were very happy with the ambition of the plans, and it has been also recognized, I think, outside and by the Council, but I think generally also by the Parliament. Now, if we look at the impact that it has, we had done some simulation at the time, and here my colleague is nicely putting a chart to show the impact. So you can see that we have some simulation tool, because of course we cannot only see the impact now, but we can predict it. And we had done estimate and shows that in total we expect the impact of this RRPs on growth would be about at the peak 1.3% of GDP. Now we have different scenarios. The dotted line are a different scenario or a scenario that we had before, but the blue line is the ones that we find is probably the most reasonable at this stage. So it is a relatively large impact. But what is also more interesting is to look at the next slide, which show you that in fact what is the source of this, and by doing this experiment we can just try to have the impact of all member states doing this plan together. We can see really the benefit of acting together, because as you can see in the slides, you have a large part of the impact that comes from spillover, which is the orange line. So you can see in the slide that the RRF helped the conversion, because you have more allocation towards the country that are generally a low GDP per capita. This was by design, and so they have larger allocation and they benefit highly from it. And you can see that the impact on the percentage point of growth is really large. For example, Bulgaria, Greece, Romania, Croatia, and so on, and Italy, on Portugal as well. So large impact, and that the impact comes largely from the direct impact, but you still have some effect through spillover, meaning through the trade and the fact that your trade partner are growing, and so then you benefit from it because your export are growing as well. So that's the gist of it. But what is very interesting is that even the member states that are on the right hand side of the chart and that had a lower allocation, they still benefit, and a large part of it is coming from the spillover. So the impact that it has on the other, and then they benefit it as well. So it's quite of a nice experiment, I think, and a proof that our zone is really integrated. And then when we act all together, we have an extra boost, and 1/3 of the impact in total is coming from this spillover impact, which I think is very interesting. And it's also interesting to know that even the impact of 1.3 does only include the investment. So we have not modeled the impact of reform, because we know that these reforms are very important, but it's extremely difficult, and so far we don't have. I mean, we have of course modeled to show it, but it's difficult to come with a very precise estimates. But we know, and we are updating our estimation. But in the past, we had said that, for example, if we do estimate of what is the impact of some reform on growth and closing half of the gap to vis-a-vis the best performer, you could get an increase in growth up to 10 percentage points, for example, in large member states such as Greece and Italy. So there is in addition, but that's not included in that. So if you look at as I talked about the RF and what is where are we are, as I said, after 2 years, we are quite on a cruising speed. So here you can see basically for each member state, the amount of, the 100% of the allocation. You can see in the blue, what is the amount that has been already paid as pre-financing, and then in green, the amount that has already been paid as payment. So as you know, the facility allows a first 13% of pre-financing for the ones who ask, and who had their plan adopted before the end of 2021. That is why some member states adopt their plan in 2022. For example, the Netherlands, they didn't get any pre-financing. But then you can see also that implementation is clearly ongoing, because you see this payment request that has been paid, and you have, like in black, the payment requests that are ongoing. So if you look at all the amount that has already been paid, we are at 142.3 billion. And then we expect another 40 to 45 payment requests to be submitted this year, and that would add another 130 billion to it. So really implementation is ongoing, measures are being taken, and I think that is quite an important message, and that clearly will help support the economy. And I want to make this a link to the current energy and crisis situation and the repower, because as you know, so in December, we have had a political agreement on repower. So repower is in addition to the RRP, and it's our answer basically to the situation, to try to, and our action plan to help to reduce our dependency from Russian gas, but more generally to speed up the take-up of the renewable and having a more affordable, basically, energy system and energy cost. And in that context, so we have added additional money, like 20 billion of it, plus the possibility to transfer from the Brexit adjustment reserve another 5 billion. And in addition, we have still 225 billion of loans available, and we have also possibility to transfer from cohesion funds. So in total, we have 270 billion of money that is still available for the member states to implement their plan, but in particular to finance their Repower chapter, where the idea is that member state comes forward with reform and investment to reduce their dependency from the Russian gas. So to give, for example, but in the RP already, as I mentioned, we had already this green dimension was really important. And in the plans that have been approved so far, we have already 200 billion of funds that is generally targeted towards the green transition. And if you give example, we have, for example, in the Czech plan, we have a major reform on the energy efficiency of public and private buildings. We have also in the French case, for example, renovation of the electricity network, but we have also in Romania, for example, increased production capacity in Italian plants. So lots of plants have really a large share of these investments that concern the green. So I think that from that point of view, not also the RRF was already very much helping us to prepare for this crisis, because we had already a large amount of investment that were helping to fast forward our transition, our green transition. But then with Repower, we even add more firepower to this effort. And this is our best way to fight this crisis, is to be more efficient in our energy production and less dependent on these fossil fuels, and therefore lead to more affordable energy costs. Now, a last word on the economic governance review. So as you know, we came up with a communication in November of last year. And the major element of this communication is that we are trying to make this framework more simple, more transparent, more effective, and also give a large role to national ownership together with enforcement. So are we going to do this on the simplification? As you probably know, we will try to, for example, rely on one single indicator, which is the net primary expenditures. So we were not going to focus on other benchmark and matrix that we had before. On ownership, we will clearly give the possibility for the member state to modulate the adjustment path, the fiscal adjustment path, over the medium term, and to take into account in particular the investment and reform that they would undertake, and therefore allow for a longer adjustment path. On the enforcement, we are going to add a reputational sanction and new enforcement tool, in particular for the reform and investment. And one of the key idea of this reform is also to give to allow member states to ensure that member states will reduce their debt ratio, but in a realistic way, while taking also into account the need for reform and for investment, which is, to make the link to the previous slide, also something that we have borrowed, as we have been inspired from the RF, this link between reform and investment, but also, as I mentioned before, this role of the dialogue, which was very well received by member states, and is, I think, something that the member states really like in the RRF, is the dialogue between the member state and the Commission, and this dialogue and the ownership, so to allow member states to present their plan, and that will be is also featuring in the economic governance review. And on the MIP, macroeconomic imbalance procedure, we are also proposing a few reforms, but that would not require legislative changes. But one of the key messages is also to ensure that member states have more ownership, and in particular that member states will have to put forward plans that not only address the fiscal situation but also the macroeconomic situation. So there's macro-fiscal comprehensive plan is also at the core of the macroeconomic imbalance procedure. But I will stop here because I'm very sure that Martin will go in much more detail into that, and I'm very happy, of course, to answer any question that you may have on that front. Thank you.
Dear Géraldine, thanks a lot for explaining to us the situation of the RF, where we stand, where we are going, and also pointing out the quite significant expected impact on growth by the RRF. I think that's quite remarkable. And yeah, thanks for being with us today as really the expert in the Commission on RRF. Indeed, like you mentioned, you have been at the point person also for designing and negotiating it on behalf of the European Commission. We are now coming to the third panelist, Martin Larch, who is heading the Secretariat of the European Fiscal Board. The European Fiscal Board is an independent advisory body within the European Commission, so not part of the hierarchy, but developing independent thoughts, particularly on economic governance. Martin has studied or holds a PhD in economics from the University of Vienna, and also studied at the European Institute of the LSE in London. So the second graduate of the University of Vienna today on the panel, I noticed. That seems to be a good academic background to support careers in Brussels. You have worked in the European Commission since the year 2000, inter alia as head of unit in charge of Ireland during the country's financial assistance program, and as an advisor in the Bureau of European Policy Advisors, which was about the think tank reporting directly to the Commission President. And you will focus now in your introductory remarks on the chapter 7 of our publication, the economic governance review, but also what role the EU budget could play in the EU fiscal framework. Martin, I turn it over to you.
Many thanks, Pim. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very nice and timely event. Good afternoon to everyone. Let me also congratulate the Research Service of the European Parliament for a truly comprehensive report. It covers a lot of ground. It's, I think, a genuine tour de force. So I recommend everyone reading this great report. Now, I will, as you said, Tim, in my first intervention, I will try to focus on 2 points. I will try to, because it's important then for the second part. It is I will focus on. Sorry, I seem to have problems with my screen. I'm not sure whether you can still hear me. Can you confirm? Because all right, okay. So sorry, and then I just have to make a small adjustment here on my side, because I have a problem with my with my screen. I don't know why. All right, okay. Just shout in case you no longer see me, because here my screen is gone. Now, I just try to organize my first introduction around 2 parts. I will try to give a particular nuance to the assessment of the economic outlook for 2023, and then I go directly to the economic governance review, where the European Fiscal Board has also made some proposals concerning the EU budget. Now, starting with the economic outlook, 2023 is a particular year. It's particular in the sense that you can get a completely different impression depending on whether you look at annual data or quarterly data. If you look at annual averages, you will see, and this was already indicated, I think, by Géraldine and also by Nico, that 23 looks like a year of a major slowdown. So just to recall the numbers, so the current Commission forecasts, they date from autumn last year, see an average real GDP growth rate of 0.3%, down from, and that's the information to keep in mind, down from 3.2%. So a slowdown from 3.2 to 0.3% on average. What you actually then miss from this picture is that one could say, and let me try to be a bit optimistic in this context of uncertainty, one could actually say that the slowdown is already behind us. Because if you look at quarterly data, you will see that the slowdown took place Géraldine alluded to it already, took place in the last quarter, in the last 2 quarters actually of 22. And in 2023, most forecasters, including Commission, actually project a resumption of growth. Unfortunately, in terms of annual averages, this doesn't show up in the data. But it is important to recall that the outturn in the 4th quarter, when the slowdown was particularly strong, was also less strong. The slowdown was less marked than we originally thought. And when I say we, I mean most observers. Just to give you again the data, in the Commission autumn forecast, Germany, the largest euro area economy, was expected to contract by almost 1 percentage point in the 4th quarter. And the outturn was that it was broadly stable GDP in the 4th quarter, which then translated also in a broadly stable outturn for the euro area as a whole. But overall, the main message that I wanted to convey here is that the energy crisis, the spike in energy prices, of course, has triggered a slowdown, but this slowdown turned out to be less significant than we originally thought, and we are now returning to a resumption of real GDP growth. But again, there was a slowdown, but it was less severe than we all thought. Maybe also to add, again, in the spirit of finding some positive elements in the otherwise sort of uncertain environment, it's important to recall that in 2022, all EU economies, I think with one sole exception, but maybe then new data may revise that, all EU economies have recovered from the COVID crisis in the sense that their level of real GDP has returned and even exceeded the level that was observed at the end of 2019, so before the COVID crisis started. So then the $1 million question, if you like, is how come that the EU economies are so resilient? And then if you look at various commentaries, you will actually conclude that the adjustment to the energy crisis, to the energy price hike, was much quicker than we initially thought. We feared that on some countries, adjustment to the new situation may take much longer. So we may have been a bit too pessimistic there. And there was also, and this brings me then to the second part, there was also, of course, a very strong fiscal impulse that was deliberated in the member states in response to the energy price hike. So governments have been relatively expansionary in response to the energy price hike, replacing, so to speak, the phasing out of the energy measures taken in response to COVID with new measures that were aimed to protect households from higher energy prices. Now, what you also read and then in the various commentaries is that this attempt of fiscal policymakers to respond to the energy price hike clashes with the efforts of the ECB to control inflation. And this is certainly a very important issue that we are facing right now. I think that does not need any further comments. Some observers and some of the participants in this event may ask the question: what is actually wrong with trying to cushion the impact of energy price hikes with fiscal measures? And it may suffice to recall that an energy price hike for Europe that is a major importer of energy, is what economists call a terms of trade shock. So a terms of trade shock means that the prices of imports increase much more than the prices of exports, which in plain words means that there is an important transfer from the energy importing countries to the energy exporting countries. And this transfer affects everyone, rich households, households in the middle of the society, and poor households. So it's actually not possible to compensate everyone for such a shock. So that's actually the main problem that we currently face in the macroeconomic policy mix, that on the one hand, the ECB is trying to achieve its mandated targets to control inflation, bring it down to 2%, while fiscal policy is actually trying to do what is not possible, namely to compensate everyone for a real loss in income. In fact, based on data provided by DG ECFIN of the Commission, 70% of the measures that member states have taken in response to the energy price hikes are very broad-based. They are not targeted to vulnerable households. So just to nuance the context in 2023, which is the context against which the Commission is carrying out the economic governance review. Géraldine has outlined the main dimensions. Again, here it may be useful to recall that the process for the economic governance review was launched already a while ago, namely at the beginning of 2000. And it was actually triggered in response to a legislative requirement, because the probably well-known 6 and 2-pack reforms of the Stability and Growth Pact of 2011 and 2013, the legislative underpinnings require the Commission actually to review every 5 years these pieces of legislation, and that's why the Commission at the beginning of 2020 launched the review, which then was suspended because of COVID. It was then relaunched in earnest with a concrete proposal with orientations for a reform in November last year. But in order to better understand the orientations, let me just invite you to a brief flashback. I will now share if I manage here with my screen, I will share with you a slide. So I'm not sure whether you see the slide. Can someone maybe tell me whether this slide is visible on the screen? Thank you, yes. Tim. So this is a very simple slide that actually groups. I think here we still let me see. No, we have not included UK, but it covers the period 2000 to 2024. It groups member states by the average debt to GDP ratio in the period 2011 and 2019. And the main takeaway that I would like to highlight from this graph, and it's important to understand, and also the challenges that the Commission and the Council and in the future probably the Parliament will face when discussing legislative reform proposals, is the following. The message is that overall, and this is my view, but it's the view also of the board, and is documented in the various annual reports that the EFB has published, that overall, for most countries, the Stability and Growth Pact, the commonly agreed rules, have worked quite well. In the sense that if you look at the green group and the blue group, these countries, they have enacted a course of fiscal policy that is, broadly speaking, in line with what you want to have, namely in line with a sustainable course of public finances. What does it mean? It means that you let government debt increase, possibly also by a significant margin when a crisis comes. That's the purpose of the government sector of fiscal policy. They act as a buffer, so they let government debt increase, and then they bring it back down during the recovery phase to create a space then for the next shock. You see this. You see this pattern twice in this graph for the blue and the green group. First after the global financial crisis, and then when COVID comes. You have a smaller group of other countries, small in terms of number, but still important in terms of the size of the of GDP in the EU and the euro area, where this pattern, this reasonable pattern, does not materialize or has not materialized. What you see there is that debt to GDP ratios increase in the wake of crisis, and it does actually not come down. And this creates, of course, a problem for the sustainability of public finances, but also it creates problems for what we discussed, what I mentioned before, for the ECB. As we all know, the ECB, in response first to the global financial crisis, but then also in response to the energy crisis, announced specific measures that the official language is that are meant to ensure a efficient transmission of monetary policy across the whole euro area, but essentially de facto is meant to address the problem that there are some countries that follow a course of fiscal policy action that is not compatible with a sustainable fiscal policies. And now the ambition of the Commission is to address this very diverging development in fiscal policy with the orientations that I stop now sharing the screen. And the ambition of the Commission is now to address these diverging patterns in fiscal policy making in the EU. So a large set of countries that performs well, and a smaller set of countries in terms of number that has problems of sustainability. Now, Géraldine has again outlined the main course of action outlined in the orientations: simplification, differentiation across countries, and also better enforcement. Now, I think that there is a very broad agreement, as far as we can see as European Fiscal Board, among most observers, that in terms of principles, in terms of ambitions, the Commission orientations published on the 9th of November go into the right direction. So there's no doubt about that. Now, the challenge is, as the expression has it, the devil is in the detail. And our understanding is, we are not directly involved, but our understanding is that discussions in the Council are quite difficult. There are in the Council two groups of countries. I mean, this is a bit of a caricature, but it captures the essence of the problem. There are those countries, if you like, the green and the blue group, not exactly that I showed in the previous graph, on the one hand, and the red group in the other. The green group and blue group saying that, well, the rules have worked for many of us, and the main problem is to make sure that you create buffers ahead of a crisis. So they insist on what we call a risk reduction, while the other group says, well, you know, there are many difficulties. We are not responsible for crises that hit us like the global financial crisis or the COVID crisis. and there is a need for risk sharing, or at least for a better differentiation when it comes to implementation of commonly agreed fiscal rules. And this tension between these two groups is still very much present. We, of course, including the European Fiscal Board, hope that in the coming months, the divisions between the two groups can be overcome. But I personally think that we are facing a very long and not easy negotiations in the Council. And once the Commission puts on the table a concrete legislative proposal, also a lengthy negotiation involving the Parliament, at least as regards some of the elements, because as you know, especially colleagues from the Parliament, some of the legislative some of the pieces of legislation that underpin the Stability and Growth Pact are actually adopted by the special adoption procedure. Now, where does it leave us for the future? And then here I close my first intervention. If the negotiations are, as I argue, are going to be difficult and lengthy, what is going to happen in the meantime? Because although in the public debate we always say, or we always hear, that the pact is suspended, this is actually not a correct presentation of what actually the facts are. The so-called general escape clause does not suspend the rules, and this is a point that formally the European Commission has always stressed in its official documents. So there is this sense that the current rules cannot be applied, and that there's still some way to go to have new rules. So there is a bit of a risk, and this is the perspective, if you like, of the European Fiscal Board as independent advisor. So there's the risk that we will be living in a vacuum for quite some time, which is certainly not helpful for the member states concerned, nor is it for the policy mix more generally, including the European Central Bank. So I stop here in terms of first intervention, and then I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Dear Martin, thanks a lot for this interesting thoughts on the economy and on the future of the economic governance in the EU. I would like to come back before I also look at questions that come in from the audience. I see one, but if other colleagues and participants in the audience have more questions, please feel free to send them through the chat. My first question would be to Nicolae ŞTEFÂNUŞțîn. You have pointed out that the EU budget, and particularly the multi-annual financial framework, will be too tight to finance all the challenges that the EU budget is facing. And then the question is, I mean, of course, the plan A would be to increase the EU budget and the MFF, but if we don't get that, is it like a second prize if we at least get additional instruments, if they're funded off budget, and how do we ensure that there's still enough parliamentary scrutiny so that in the end also for those off-budget instruments, which in the end also large parts of the recovery and resilience facility, that we still manage that there's democratic oversight and scrutiny by the European citizens and then by the European Parliament?
The short answer, Tim, is no. If you proliferate intergovernmental solutions, if you proliferate intergovernmental loans, intergovernmental packages, they are good, obviously. I mean, Next Generation was a Volksgeschichte, was a success story of the European Union. But at the same time, with the proliferation of intergovernmental solutions, the accountability, the implication, the involvement of the European Parliament is missing. The rules, the oversight of the EPPO, etc., of other institutions which is not anything, it's a lot. I'm taking the example of the EPPO because I think the EPPO has the merit to make it clear to the citizens that the money is being spent in a clean way. I was surprised to even hear other institutions speak not so fondly of the EPPO, saying that because they show illicit use of the European money, it creates an impression that the European money is being stolen. Well, I would turn it around. If we don't have anybody to check on how the spending is done, then the overall impression will be that the money doesn't end up well, especially since we have cases like in Hungary, sometimes in countries where entire national resilience plans have gone to one or two companies.
Okay, thank you.
That is a big problem. I think it has to do with democratic legitimacy, and it has to do with oversight. And so I would prefer that the big amount of the money goes into a European budget with a European oversight, with the power of the parliament represented, with all these traditional guarantees.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nico. I would have then the question to Géraldine. I mean, you pointed out the dialogues between the member states and the Commission that worked very well on the recovery and resilience funds and the spending. And the question, and I have no doubt that then if the experts talk together and get instructions and inspiration from the Commission, and there are also the checks of the milestones and targets, but where is, so to say, any parliamentary oversight? I mean, because the member states' parliaments don't play a relevant role, and the European Parliament is also not really involved as a decision maker. It's more we are informed by the Commission, but where do you see the current state of democratic oversight, and where do you think are possible improvements to be made in the near future, Géraldine?
Okay, thanks a lot for the question. Just to reply first to the intervention by Nico, I mean, the DRF is completely within the treaty. It's not an intergovernmental, it's an instrument, an EU instrument, fully in line. So the difference is that it's not under the MFF ceiling, but it's completely subject to the discharge by the European Parliament. It has been negotiated with the European Parliament. So it is completely a tool that is within a treaty and the union framework. Now on the checks of the funding is being used, we are doing loads of checks. So the money is only dispersed when milestones and targets have been met. We are doing ex-ante audit, we're doing ex-post audit to make sure that this is the case. And we have also, in the context of the repower, we have negotiated, and thanks to the Parliament, that now the member state will have to publish the list of the largest 100 final recipients of the fund. So we will be able to see where, for each member state, where the money is going, what are the largest recipients. So I think this is an additional element of transparency. Now, for the role of the European Parliament, I think that what is important to understand is that, and it was the key issue in the negotiation, the Parliament wanted to have the same role as the Council. The problem is that the institutions have a different role. The Council is an implementing body, but the Parliament is a legislative body. So the treaty does not allow the Commission to delegate some of these power to the Parliament, but we are able to do so for the Council. So that was the major difference. So we cannot change unless we change the treaty, which will be complicated. We cannot change this. But at the same time, I think that it was a major breakthrough. I mean, a major change compared to the past for the RF of the influence of the Parliament, because they are the formal role, but there is also all this informal exchange that we have and the information sharing that we have provided. And I think here the Parliament is extremely active. First of all, we have, in the context of the RF, we have 2 dialogues, every 2 months, a dialogue at the Commissioner and EVP level, which takes place and which provides a lot of information. But in addition to that, the Parliament has invited the Director General from Recover, the section Recover, Céline Gower, and the Director General of the ECFIN, so Martin Verwey, to come to this working group, where in the beginning took place almost every week, where either Martin or Céline would come to the Parliament, would explain what we are doing, giving a lot of information vis-à-vis the Parliament. In addition, the Parliament would send us, for example, comments. And I know that we have, for example, from the Green Group, we had loads of comments from this group that pointed when we showed, because we also provide a lot of information to the Parliament, and all the plans that were submitted by the state were immediately shared with the Parliament and the Council on equal basis. And on that basis, the Parliament has exerted scrutiny to look whether there are not specifically measures that were eligible or not, that were in line with the no significant harm, and so on and so forth. So the Parliament exerted really a lot of scrutiny in that regard. We have also provided the scoreboard, which is also another way to give a lot of information on real-time information where we are on the implementation of the plan. So I think that there is really, it was for me at least personally a game changer, and the role of the Parliament is much higher in the context of the ERF within the treaty boundary, because we cannot just avoid this, but at the same time this power of influence is clearly there, not to mention, of course, the large role of the Parliament in the negotiation of these instruments. And then one of the key, for example, proof is the fact that now we have this list of 100 beneficiary final recipients that member states have to provide, and this is clearly coming from one of the Parliament requests that managed to get that through, and that apply not only to the Repower but to the ERF. So I think that in a nutshell, I think that it's rather an example, in my view, of for the ERF, the role of the Parliament and the importance that it does. And finally, of course, the discharge. This is, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are completely subject to the discharge, and so in that context, also the Parliament exerts its role of scrutiny. So I think so here I would not think that we can do more, because at the same time, from the Commission, I can tell you this is a lot of work also from our side to make sure that the Parliament is completely aware of what we are doing. But I think it's rather probably taken as an example for other instruments.
Thank you very much for the clear stance and explanation from the Commission, Géraldine. I have a question to you on the Recovery and Resilience funds. One key feature is that a certain amount or certain part of the funds is invested into the green transition and into the digital transition. And my question would be, who defines what projects are actually green and what are digital? And could that, for example, be also something where the Parliament could give a bit more input in future, so that not someone just defines, or the member states, first of all, use different categories or definitions? I mean, is there some central control or definition at all? And also to make sure that no one is just misusing this and labeling some investment as green or digital, which actually isn't. And in the end, it gives the wrong impression.
No, here, to be very clear, it is in the regulation. So it has been negotiated with the Parliament. And in fact, we started from because indeed, so it's legally, we have the obligation as a Commission to check that 37% of the estimated cost of the plan is towards this climate spending. And we have, because since this is a clear criteria, legally, we need a very clear methodology. So this methodology is annexed to the regulation, was negotiated with the Parliament. And in particular, the Parliament had a major role in making sure that, in making it even more demanding than it was initially. And so we have taken a lot of inspiration from the taxonomy regulation, even though we had to pay attention to the fact that in the RRP, we are laying out investment, but we don't have necessarily all the details as you have when you prepare an investment you are about to invest in your funding. But we have really improved our methodology, and the green in particular were very helpful to that. And then in the implementation, as I mentioned, we got, and we are very, very much welcoming this and looking forward to have that further. The Green sent us, for example, a list of all the investments that they thought that maybe didn't just meet the do no significant harm, and we have answered to them, and we have really looked, because we looked ourselves, of course, we do the checks, we have experts that are checking this, we discuss a lot with the member state. In case we have doubt, we add criteria in the CID to make sure that the investment is really aligned with the do no significant harm, and we will not accept an investment that doesn't meet that. But in some cases, the Green had some doubt, and then we looked again and we reassured them really, and we send us then really an answer, investment by investment, to show that we have indeed looked at this, but according to us. And I think that they are, I don't know if they are part of the call, but at least from the Green MEP, I think they were very happy with this type of collaboration. That's one of the aspects I said, so that the Parliament is clearly exerting this oversight role here.
Okay, now thanks a lot for this clarification. I think that's highly important for the credibility in the end, of course, also of the programs and of the investments that they actually achieve the green targets in detail, and that this is thoroughly checked also by the Commission. Nico, you have raised your hand.
The debate, even though the debate is good for the European Union, I was just wondering, and maybe Géraldine can provide the information of how many people in the Commission follow the implementation of the resilience plans, because I imagine it is something where it would be hard, I would say, that the Commission manages to implement and the real to follow the real implementation of the grants and loans that come from NextGen and go to the member states. And secondly, indeed, the Parliament was involved, but not on the amounts, not on the division between grants and loans. You know, it wasn't a typical budgetary policy such as the ones we are used to. But other than the resilience plans and other than the NextGen, we do see a proliferation of intergovernmental and governmental intervention, an erosion also of state aid rules that lead to major economic and industrial differences among the member states. So it is a problem that we're facing, that the union's budget no longer seems to be the main way to prop up the economy and bring lower the differences between member states.
Nico, in your introductory statement, you mentioned the sovereignty fund. Also, you mentioned that Germany and France were investing a lot, and maybe other member states not. There were also numbers given by Commission Vice President Vestager, which said that in terms of authorized state aid, that Germany and France were larger than the rest together of the member states by far. And but how would you fund this sovereignty fund, like the NGEU or out of the EU budget, or what is your thinking on that if you set up such a fund?
The sovereignty fund seems like a cohesion on steroids in a sense. I mean, it's there are traditional instruments for that kind of catching up. No, obviously, I would prefer a budgetization of policies like that.
Okay, good. Géraldine, you were also mentioned, or the Commission in the reply, or you were asked by Nico about the resources, the human resources of the Commission when it comes to following up on the implementation of the RF in the member states.
Yeah, okay. So I wanted to just state that the Commission, contrary to many of the other institutions, have not asked for additional resources so we had to implement this major instrument without any additional staff, which honestly it's unheard. And I'm the visual testify of the work that is implied this type of decision. But anyway, so I think that other institutions, including the Parliament and ECHA, have asked for a lot of resources, and we have it. So what we had to do is that we shuffle basically people around to make sure that we can implement it. So I cannot tell you the exact number, but at least in ECFIN we had, of course, already desks that were following generally the member states, and now they are basically following and implementing the RF on top of what they used to do, meaning the fiscal surveillance, the forecast, and so on and so forth. So, and this is certainly about 100 people. Then we have, in addition, we had to add a new audit unit in ECFIN, about 30 people. And then we have also a unit that is organized the coordination party of this, another, I would say, 10 people. And then we have the Section Recover Task Force, which is another 100 people that are basically looking at that. But that meant that all these people have been taken from other priority for the Commission, and we have quite, I mean, the workload on these things is immense. And this now, this was without mentioning the ECHA audit, and I wanted to just mention that because we respect fully the European Court of Auditor, but it's very important that we all understand that this comes with a huge cost in terms of human resources for the Commission. And just to give you an idea, we will have about 16 performance audits just for this year from ECHA on the RF. Plus, we will have ECHA is auditing every single payment request, so we will have about 45 or 50. So if they audit all of them, so you add 50 plus 16, you are talking about 60 audits for the year, and that needs to be also just shouldered by us as horizontal and by all the team that is working on the desk. So it's a huge work. I think that we have shown that the resilience by being able to produce such a high quality work, and then it has been recognized by everyone, but with a major effort from the Commission in terms of efficiency and workload, I think.
Géraldine, thanks. When I hear that, and I think it's particularly obvious in the field of RF, where the Commission has taken over a huge new task, which needs a lot of human resources without getting additional staff. So if I look just at the government of the member state, I know best, in Germany, they have in the last years gotten thousands of new posts for the central government. Maybe we should also fight not only for 45 more staff or whatever in cyber security of parliament, and 10 more for the Court of Auditors, but also have a sizable increase of staff in the Commission. That's just a comment from me. I would like to go back to one comment or to the presentation of Martin, because you have pointed out that for a lot of member states, the compliance with the fiscal rules works, but then for the small group not. Do you have also any innovative instruments or ideas how to make sure that those member states work better? What's the thinking there of the European Fiscal Board, a bit out of the box thinking, or being it some kind of debt sustainability measures, where then if you see the debt sustainability is too high, you have automatic haircuts, or that you have specific funds where you can increase and give some not only sticks but also carrots to the member states who do not who are then making sure to fulfill the criteria or the comply with the rules.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Indeed. Now, as I indicated in my initial statement, the big challenge is really to make sure that essentially all member states follow a course of action that is sustainable over the long run. What I did not mention, but I will mention now, is that the European Fiscal Board has also been on record several times for supporting the idea of a central fiscal capacity. Okay, so there's this idea that there are some shocks, you know, even if you create buffers in good times, there are some shocks that are really beyond the control of every government, and therefore they can be of a size that require then an intervention at the center. And the COVID crisis was a prime example, and the Commission, or the EU, actually, one should say, must say, the EU has reacted in a very positive way. So the Recovery and Resilience Facility was the right answer. Now, specifically to your question, so how to deal with this group of countries? This group of countries that have problem with sustainability is not entirely homogeneous. There are some countries like Italy, where the problem does not primarily lie with following rules, but it's actually growth or productivity. Italy, if you look at long-term statistics, had an average growth rate of close to 0 since 1999. Average growth rate of 0. So the problem there cannot be solved with fiscal rules. It should not be solved with fiscal rules, but it needs to be solved by implementing policies that support investment and reforms. And that's precisely what the RRF does. So for Italy, certainly, and not only for Italy, the RRF is an important silver lining. Now, it is a temporary, it's meant as a temporary instrument, because this is the agreement that was reached in the Council. And the reason is, again, I think linked to what I mentioned before. There is, unfortunately, in terms of, let's say, the history of economic integration in Europe, there is this perception that some countries are better in keeping the house in order than others, and why should some always pay for the others? I'm not supporting this view, but I'm just presenting this fact. It's again this distinction between risk reduction and risk sharing. Again, from an economic point of view, and the EFB has been on record several times, from an economic point of view, it makes absolute sense to have a central fiscal capacity at the EU level. A bigger budget with, if you like, with the capacity to run deficits when necessary. So there's no doubt about this. There has never been doubt. We know this since the 1960s. And this necessity has been recalled in all major programmatic documents that have been published since then, including the McDougall report that was mentioned before, but also the Werner Plan and the Delors report. It's a political problem. As long as there is the perception that risks are not random across the member states, there is this hesitation to create a central fiscal capacity. So as long as this major political problem persists, I think instruments like the RRF, based on Article 122, are going to be the solutions. I stress again, the European Fiscal Board is on record for stressing the importance of a central fiscal capacity, but we are not naive, we are facing hard political problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. So central fiscal capacity, meaning a larger EU budget, would be the preferred option. But if that's not possible, then the instruments we have at the moment, the off-budget instruments, although in the EU treaty under the roof of the EU treaty and EU rules, but are then maybe the second best solution. I've received a question in the chat which says, is directed to you, Géraldine. The RRF is being used to mitigate the impact of yet another crisis. So it was set up, of course, to fight the problems in connection with the pandemic. And now we use it again to fight the current crisis coming out of the war, the Russia's war of aggression against the Ukraine. I mean, on how many fronts can the RRF fight? And without any fresh money, or that's, I think, a bit what's behind this question.
No, thanks for this question. No, I think that the RRF was not designed to fight every single crisis that we will see. It was designed to really be the response to the COVID crisis. But at the same time, I mean, there is a link between what was financed already, as I mentioned, and the repower and the Russian crisis. So what the RRP was clearly focused on having investment and reform that meets the CSRs, but also that have a large, I mean, at least 37% investment in the green transition. So as such, it was really spot on in the sense that we were already financing a lot of renovation scheme efficiency to increase the efficiency of our energy system and so on and so forth. And the response, of course, there is a short-term response to the energy crisis, which may be, and some member states have used it more than others, but Martin has mentioned that largely untargeted support measures. But that can only be a one-off response. But the main response to this energy crisis is to make our economy more efficient in terms of the energy production. So having more renewable, more insulated building, and so on and so forth. So in that way, we have just reinforced this dimension in the RP, and including, it's true, some ability to finance this gas facility, which is with an exception of the do no significant harm. But for the rest, I mean, gives more money, but to something that we were partly already doing. So the link between the two is very tight. So that's why, but we could not start using this instrument to fight every single crisis that we have, and I think it's not the intention. But here, really, the two are very much linked. That's why it was we thought it was the best way to do it, because some of these schemes would then be scaled up, we say, so with additional funding. And it's clear another reason for why we have used RF for the report is also because it was a tool that was able to deliver fast in terms of money, but also this combination of reform and investment was also very important. And in this current energy crisis, we need investment for sure, but we need also reform to make sure that they are sustainable, and the framework in which this investment takes place is important. And also all these measures in terms of facilitating the reduction of our consumption, our habit, and so on and so forth is also very important. So that's why. But the idea is not to have it just as a multi-dimensional firepower.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this explanation, Géraldine. Etienne?
Thank you very much, Tim. And we are coming to the end of this event. So I would like to thank the speakers, Nico, Géraldine, and Martin. It has been an extremely stimulating discussion, looking at a lot of issues. Thank you also to you, Tim, for the very effective moderation. We have talked about Europe being able to deliver, and we have to think that in less than 18 months, we'll have already a new parliament. And between now and these 18 months, we'll have the electoral campaign and the election. And it's important that we are able to find these solutions in order to meet the expectations of the public. That brings me to the announcement of an event we are going to have at the end of the month on the 28th, which is a book talk with Lisa Delmuth and Martin Berger on their book on citizens, on how citizens perceive the European Union. I encourage you to join online on the 28th of February. Before that, tomorrow, we'll have an event on site in the library, which is about agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and it's an on-site and online event. So in other way, an hybrid event. So I encourage you also to join for those who are interested. I'd like also to say to close that after the economic and budgetary outlook, the EPRS is producing two big outlooks: the demographic outlook that comes later in the spring, and in June, the peace and security. So these studies give really an overview year after year of the situation, and also suggests ways of development. Again, thank you a lot to our speakers that took the time to be with us now today, and thank you also to our numerous online audience. I wish you well for the rest of the day. Bye-bye. Thanks.